It was supposed to be a Sunday afternoon church anniversary dinner, the kind where the parking lot filled up before noon, and folding tables stretched from the fellowship hall all the way into the grass. Rosa had been up since 4 in the morning. Jade found out later, not from her mother, but from Sister May, who lived 2 houses down and saw the kitchen light on when she walked her dog before sunrise. By the time Jade arrived from Atlanta just after 11, her mother had already arranged 12 sheet pans of cornbread, 2 dozen jars of bread and butter pickles, and a pot of collard greens large enough to feed the entire congregation twice over. Rosa's apron was damp across the front. Her hair, which she had pressed carefully the night before, had gone soft at the temples from steam. She smiled when she saw Jade's car pull in. "You made it. Drive okay?" "Fine, Mom. You've been up since 4, haven't you?" Rosa waved her off. "I had things to finish. Go say hello to your father." That was how it always started. "Go say hello. Don't upset him. Not today." Bernard was sitting in the living room with the television on, wearing his good slacks and his church shoes already, though service wasn't for another hour. He looked up when Jade walked in and gave her the kind of nod a man gives a stranger in an elevator. "You're late," he said. "I said I'd be here before noon." He looked back at the television. Jade went back to the kitchen. The church anniversary dinner had been Rosa's idea, or at least her labor, the same way every gathering for the past 30 years had been her labor. She planned the menu, bought the groceries with whatever Bernard allowed her from the household account, cooked everything herself, and loaded the car while Bernard sat with his hands folded across his stomach, waiting to be driven there. When people complimented the food, he accepted it with a modest tilt of his head, as though he had contributed something beyond his presence. By 1 o'clock, the fellowship hall was packed. Children ran between chairs. The older deacons stood in clusters near the door. The women from Rosa's prayer circle gathered around the food table, lifting aluminum foil from dishes and murmuring approval. Rosa moved between them quietly, refilling, adjusting, keeping everything running. Jade watched her mother from across the room and felt the familiar ache she never knew what to do with. She was 32 years old. She had left Macon at 18 on a partial scholarship to Georgia State and had not looked back, not because she didn't love her mother, but because she understood even then that staying would swallow her whole. She worked as a marketing manager now for a mid-sized healthcare company in Atlanta. She had a car she'd bought herself, an apartment with her name on the lease, a savings account she had never once been asked to explain. Her brother Kendall had stayed local. He married a woman named Felice, had 2 kids, and spent the last 4 years chasing one business idea after another, each one somehow requiring a loan he never quite paid back. People called Bernard and Rosa blessed to have 2 such different children. Jade had learned to smile when they said it. She was refilling her sweet tea when she heard Bernard's voice rise above the crowd. It started low, the way a storm starts low, with a pressure in the air before any sound. Then it crested. "You think I don't know? You think I wouldn't find out?" Jade set her cup down. Bernard had Rosa by the elbow, pulling her toward the side door that opened onto the church parking lot. Rosa stumbled once. Her serving spoon hit the floor with a clatter that made the nearest table go quiet. "Outside," he pulled her outside. By the time Jade got to the door, a small crowd had already followed, not to intervene but to watch. It was the kind of crowd that formed around accidents on the highway, faces turned toward the damage. "Mrs. Coleman told me this morning," Bernard said, loud enough for the parking lot to hear. "She said thank you, Bernard, for that birthday cake Rosa made for my granddaughter. Said she gave you $75 for it." He released Rosa's arm. $75. You took money from our neighbors." Rosa stood very still. There was a red mark already forming on the inside of her arm where his fingers had been. "She asked me to bake it. I spent 2 days on it, the fondant alone." "I don't care what you spent. We don't take money from neighbors. That's not how we do things in this family." His voice dropped, which was somehow worse than when it was raised. "You embarrassed me. I earned that money." The slap was flat and sharp in the afternoon heat. Rosa's head turned with it. Her hand came up slowly to cover her cheek. The crowd went absolutely silent. Jade was already moving. She pushed between 2 deacons and put herself between her mother and Bernard, before he could say another word. "Step back," she said. Bernard looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the particular irritation of a man who has never been effectively challenged by anyone and finds the experience baffling. This is between your mother and me. Go back inside. No. Jade, Rosa touched her daughter's sleeve. Please don't. Mom. Jade didn't take her eyes off Bernard. I need you to step to the side. She waited until Rosa had moved. Then she turned and looked at the people standing in the parking lot. Some she had known since childhood. Sister May, who had watched her mother's kitchen light on since before sunrise. Deacon Pruitt, who had eaten at Rosa's table 100 times. Kendall, standing near the back, hands in his pockets, studying his shoes. I want to ask all of you something, Jade said. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. How many of you have eaten food my mother cooked? Raise your hand. No one moved. Come on. She's been feeding this congregation for 30 years. Hands up. Slowly, awkwardly, hands went up around the parking lot. Good. Now, Mrs. Coleman's granddaughter had a birthday. She wanted a special cake. My mother spent 2 full days making it by hand. The layers, the frosting, the decorations. Mrs. Coleman paid her $75, which for 2 days of skilled labor is actually an insult. She paused. My father just slapped her for accepting it, and every one of you stood here and watched. She looked at Bernard. You've spent 30 years telling people you take care of this family. So let me ask you in front of everyone. Who bought the groceries when your check came up short? Who paid the light bill the winter you lost your overtime? Who baked those pies for Pastor Williams's retirement that everyone called the best they'd ever had? Bernard's jaw was tight. You don't talk to me like that. Then, tell me I'm wrong. He didn't. Jade turned to her brother. Kendall, anything you want to say? Kendall looked up. He had their father's jaw and their mother's eyes, and right now both were aimed at the ground. She didn't have to take the money, he said quietly. Dad has a point about appearances. Appearances? Jade let the words sit in the heat for a moment. You called Mom 3 weeks ago. You asked her for $25,000. For that land deal that fell through. She watched him go still. She's been taking every baking job she can find, at $75 at a time, trying to figure out how to help you. That's why she took Mrs. Coleman's money. Because her son asked for help and she had nothing left to give him. The parking lot was very quiet. Kendall's wife Felice, who had come outside during the commotion, was staring at him now with an expression Jade recognized. The first look of a woman beginning to understand something she had long suspected. I'm taking my mother home, Jade said. We'll come back for her dishes. Rosa let herself be guided to the car. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap and her cheek still bright from where his hand had landed. They drove 3 blocks before she spoke. You didn't have to do that. I know. People will talk. They were already talking, Mom. They were just doing it quietly. Rosa looked out the window at the familiar streets, the duplex on the corner, the tire shop, the beauty salon that changed names every few years, but always smelled the same when you walked past. He's going to be furious, she said. I know that too. Jade. She paused. How did you know about the $25,000? Kendall called me first. I told him no. I didn't know he went to you after. Rosa folded her hands tighter. Has he ever paid you back? Jade asked. Any of it, anytime. The silence answered. Jade exhaled. She thought about the last Christmas she'd come home. Kendall showing up in a new truck, talking about a deal in Augusta. Felice with new earrings. Rosa serving dinner on the same dishes she'd used since the 90s, then asking Jade quietly before bed if she could spare anything for the electric bill. Mom, I need you to be honest with me about something. Rosa turned from the window. When Dad lost that money in Savannah, the gambling debt 10 years ago, where did that money come from to pay it off? Where did you get it? Rosa's hands went very still in her lap. It was handled, she said. Mom. A long pause, then barely above a whisper, Grandma Essie's machine. The sewing machine. The old singer that had sat in the corner of Rosa's childhood bedroom, then followed her into marriage, then into the back room of this house where Jade had grown up. Her grandmother had used it to make church dresses, prom gowns, curtains for half the neighborhood. When Essie passed, it had gone to Rosa, the only grandchild who'd learned to use it properly. Jade had fallen asleep as a little girl listening to the sound of it running, a low electric hum that meant her mother was awake and working and everything was fine. You sold it. I got $1,400. It was enough to clear it. Does he know where the money came from? Rosa shook her head once. He never asked. Jade pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine off. The azaleas along the front walk were blooming. The wreath on the door was the spring one, blue and yellow, that Rosa changed out every few months. A house that looked, from the outside, like a house where people were taken care of. "I need to tell you something," Jade said. 2 years ago, I found a machine at an estate sale outside of Decatur. Same model as Grandma Essie's, same year, same color. I bought it and I've been keeping it at my apartment. She looked at her mother. "I was waiting for the right time to give it to you. I didn't know how to explain it without explaining why." She paused. "I think the right time might be now." Rosa's face did something complicated. Her chin held, but just barely. They went inside. Bernard came home 2 hours later, poured himself a glass of sweet tea, and sat in the kitchen with the posture of a man who believed his silence was a punishment he was administering rather than receiving. He stayed that way until Kendall arrived that evening. And then the two of them sat at the table, and Bernard began explaining, in the tone of someone announcing a reasonable decision, what Jade needed to do. She needed to transfer her car title to Kendall's name. She needed to take out a loan, $40,000, they'd decided, though the number had apparently gone up since the morning. She had a steady income. She had good credit. It would be easy for her. "No," Jade said. Bernard's hand hit the table. "I'm not asking." "I know you're not. The answer is still no." He stood up. She didn't move. Rosa, who had been standing at the sink, with her back to all of it, turned around. She wasn't holding anything. She wasn't raising her voice. She just turned and stood in the kitchen she had cooked in for 30 years, and something in the way she stood made Bernard stop whatever he was about to do next. "I want a divorce," Rosa said. The words came out even and quiet, like she had carried them so long they no longer weighed anything. Bernard stared at her. "What did you just say to me?" "I said it once. I'm not saying it again." The room was absolutely still. Kendall spent the next hour trying to talk his mother down from what he called a snap decision made in a difficult day. He reminded her of her age, of her reputation in the community, of what people would say, of what their kids would ask. Felice sat in the living room and did not say one word in either direction. When Kendall finally ran out of arguments, he looked at Jade and said this was her fault for encouraging it. "I haven't said anything," Jade said. She said it herself. Rosa went to bed at 9. She lay in the dark and thought about her grandmother's sewing machine. She thought about $1,400 and the sound of it running and all the things she had made and unmade over 30 years in rooms where no one had ever said thank you. She thought, "I am 56 years old. I know how to make something from nothing. I have been doing that my entire life." She thought, late is still better than never. 3 weeks later, Rosa moved to Atlanta. She brought 2 suitcases, her cast iron skillet, and nothing she wasn't willing to leave behind. Bernard didn't come to the door when the car was packed. Kendall called twice. Both times Rosa let it ring until it stopped. Jade had cleared out the spare bedroom and put a small table by the window. The singer sat on it, covered with a cloth the same color as the one Rosa had always used. The morning Rosa's arrived, she walked into that room and ran one hand along the top of the machine and sat down in the chair and didn't say anything for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. She slept for 11 hours the first night, straight through without waking. The bakery job came through a colleague of Jade's, who mentioned that the place 2 blocks from the office was looking for a prep baker. Jade described her mother's cooking. The owner, a woman who had been running the place for 20 years, offered Rosa a trial shift. She arrived 40 minutes early. By 9 in the morning, she had reorganized the prep station, finished the bread order, and started on a batch of cream cheese brownies from a recipe she had been making since before Jade was born. The owner came out of her office at 10, stood in the kitchen doorway, and watched. At the end of the shift, she offered Rosa the position at $18 an hour. Rosa came home that evening and sat at Jade's kitchen table and looked at the number on the paper for a long time without speaking. "This is real?" she finally said. "That's real, Mom. I've never made $18 an hour." "I know." She folded the paper and put it in her purse. Then she took it out and looked at it again before putting it back. When the first paycheck cleared, Jade drove her to the bank. Rosa filled out all the paperwork herself, slowly and carefully, double-checking her handwriting. She slid the form across the counter with her name at the top, written in her own hand. The bank sent her home with a temporary card and a printed receipt. Rosa tucked them together in her purse. That night she took them out and set them side by side on the kitchen table and looked at them for a while. First thing that's ever been just mine, she said. Jade was washing dishes and didn't answer right away. I keep waiting, Rosa said, for someone to call and say there's been a mistake. There's no mistake. Rosa nodded slowly, like she was deciding whether to believe it. Then she folded the receipt twice and put it back in her purse next to the pay stub, and she went to bed. Bernard lasted 6 weeks alone in Macon before Kendall drove out and brought him back to the city. By then, Felice had gone through enough of the financial records to understand what she was actually looking at. Not just one bad investment, but a pattern stretching back years. She had moved in with her parents 2 weeks after the church anniversary dinner and had not yet come back. Kendall was in the house alone, working double shifts, eating drive-through every night. Bernard showed up at Jade's building on a Tuesday afternoon. He stood on the sidewalk outside the entrance and called Rosa's name until the building manager came out. When he didn't leave, security was called. By the time the call came through to Jade's phone, it was already over. Bernard was in his car driving away, and 2 men in polo shirts were walking back toward the entrance. Jade went downstairs and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the space where the car had been. She thought about the church parking lot, the ring of people standing still, the silence after the slap, and how no one had moved, and how much easier it was to watch than to step forward. She had been angry about that for weeks. Standing here now, she wasn't sure anger was the right word anymore. It was something quieter and more permanent than anger. She went back upstairs. Rosa was in the kitchen with her reading glasses on, bent over a cake order someone from the bakery had forwarded her. A side job, a birthday party, a 3-layer vanilla bean. The customer's notes had Rosa's name in them. She was reading it the way she read everything these days that had her name attached to it, slowly and with full attention, as though making sure it was real. He came, Jade said. I heard. Rosa didn't look up. The building manager called up. She tilted the paper slightly. Jade, vanilla bean with raspberry between the layers. Is that too much, or just enough? Jade looked at her mother. At the reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. At the calm in her hands. At the way she sat in her own chair at her own table, considering a question that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. Just enough, Jade said. Definitely just enough. Rosa nodded, satisfied. She made a small note in the margin, set the paper down, and got up to put the kettle on. Outside, the afternoon was long and golden over the city. A bus was pulling away from the corner. Someone down the block was calling a child in for dinner. All the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday falling into evening. Rosa hummed something low while she waited for the water to boil. An old gospel melody she'd carried as long as Jade could remember, the kind of tune that lives in the body rather than the mind. She didn't hum it in Macon. Jade realized only now, listening to it, that she hadn't heard it in years. When the tea was ready, Rosa set a mug in front of her daughter without being asked, the way she had always known, without being told what the people she loved needed. Then she poured a cup for herself, sat down across the table, and wrapped both hands around the warmth of it. Jade didn't open her laptop. She didn't check her phone. She just sat there in the quiet kitchen while the city settled into early evening outside the window, and listened to her mother breathe easy for the first time in as long as either of them could remember.